But it's a quick little intro if you have not viewed the first and second episodes in the series. We really went over an overview of what inflammation is, and I'd like to just briefly discuss again uh, what it means from a dietary and health context, because it is so overused as a term and a phrase, and I'm afraid that a lot of people just really don't understand it. I probably in a given day hear this phrase a dozen times. Oh, my weight is up. I feel inflamed. Oh, my GI system is off today. I think I'm inflamed. Oh, I just don't feel great. I'm not sleeping well. I think it's inflammation. You know, we've heard that phrase over and over and over in pop diet culture, and what does it really mean? So it really is a thing. There is chronic low grade inflammation measured by different blood markers, where your body is overtaxed by by way of your immune system being heightened. Your immune system is threatened in some way, chemically or through other kind of mechanical stress. Could be training for sure, overtraining, not getting enough sleep. And so you have these markers like C-reactive protein and some others that really do show your body is in that chronic low grade stressed state. And some pretty bad things happen because fat, as a collective organ that is responsible for signaling things like satiety and hunger cues, and even lean into insulin resistance and so forth. There are issues there. There are things that can work better. And it's often the case that when I really start talking with clients about some plateaus they're having, a lot of times you see those underlying issues of just deep fatigue and not getting enough sleep and so forth. But today I want to turn toward dietary fat. I was going to title this fat versus carbs and just get into that lane as we often do. But I really could only go into fat because there is so much mechanistically to talk about just this. So we'll do another episode on just carbs, and then we'll probably be done. But I want to make sure we have enough practical information to really hang our hats on and understand what this really was. So in retrospect, the further I read, I think there were a couple other studies that might have explained this better from a fat perspective. So I may mention those in our next episode, but this one really is unique. And so I wanted to leave it as is. High fat diet causes mitochondrial dysfunction as a result of impaired ADP sensitivity. Adenosine diphosphate, you've probably heard of ATP. We talk about that quite a bit. Adenosine diphosphate is after one of the phosphate molecules have broken off, in a sense, giving up its energy. The mitochondria has done its job, so to speak, and has broken ATP down to give usable energy to the cell. Mitochondria, as we all know them to be, the little powerhouses, they're always called in physiology class, of the cell. They are the organelles within every cell that literally does create the metabolic environment. So when we talk about our metabolism, our basal metabolic rate, our functional metabolic rate, non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, things like that, it's a collective addition of all of the trillions of cells in our body and how much energy they are using and creating for each individual cell. When we talk about inflammation, a lot of times down at this cellular level, you are also talking about mitochondria, because there is a lot of dysfunction with the mitochondria that becomes kind of a two-way street for not just disease processes. We talked a lot about that last week in episode 2, but just not even malfunction, just low functioning of our cells. It's the malaise, the kind of energy we could be producing, and the vitality we could be feeling. So this, as you see, the Journal of Diabetes, I think it was maybe even in Metabolism here, the Journal Metabolism is republished. So I would say this is a pretty important study. And when you get to some of the discussion points and some of the findings, I think you'll see how important this particular study was in the catalog of looking at fat as an intake nutrient and what happens in our body with inflammation. So let me read through a couple of these things. When we go through this introductory slide and one of the summary slides, I'm leaving a lot out, and I'm going to tell you why. It's just so biochemically heavy. This was an experimental study, a mechanistic study with mice. They did a huge amount of work, a lot of labs, and so I didn't want to get us tangled up in all of that methodology. So I'll try to explain what I'm including, what I'm leaving out, and then that way, if you're super interested in the research part, you can jump in and look at that. So although the etiology of type 2 diabetes is poorly defined, chronic consumption of a high-fat diet is a major contributor to whole-body glucose intolerance and insulin resistance. The molecular explanation for these responses is not fully understood. However, mitochondrial dysfunction within skeletal muscle has received attention as a potential contributor because mitochondrial content is reduced in most reports of insulin-resistant, obese human skeletal muscle. So before I go on, you'll see I intentionally kind of broke these three things apart because I'm giving you the beginning, the middle, and the end of their premise and introduction. And one thing I need to explain is how they're defining the scope of this study in this phrase here, mitochondrial content. And I think this will make sense to you guys in the exercise science world. So mitochondrial content, I remember hearing a phrase way back in the early 90s called mitochondrial density. And in somebody who is well developed physically, you're a runner, cardiovascular strength is high, you lift weights, you've developed all kinds of muscle mass, you would expect the mitochondria to proliferate and to increase in density and size. And this one particular organelle, all the little components of it, although not even completely understood, at least back then, they would just kind of measure it as, well, they're just bigger or there's more of them. And that's a good thing, mitochondrial content. And so it was always looked at as a good thing. And that was a measurement and interpretation of a lot of research. But this particular study was really, as I said, I don't want to say it's a landmark study that will go down in history, but it's really important because it upset the apple cart in some ways of understanding that. So these data suggest changes in mitochondrial content are related to insulin sensitivity, but reductions in mitochondrial oxidative capacity are not uniformly reported in literature with insulin resistance. The high-fat feeding has been shown to induce glucose intolerance and insulin resistance despite increasing mitochondrial content. Together, these data suggest reductions in mitochondrial respiratory capacity are not required for the development of insulin resistance. So one of the things in this debate of what causes things, remember, this was a study in the journal Diabetes, so very interested from an endocrinology standpoint, and they were looking at this was unique literature a while back that, oh my gosh, why do high-fat diets cause more complications with diabetes than high-carb diets? As you can understand, that was a shock to a lot of people. It still is, frankly. So one of the things they looked at was, well, when somebody has a high-fat diet, we see mitochondrial content increase. And isn't mitochondrial content, hypertrophy or proliferation, a good thing? And so those two things were just kind of correlated and bypassed. Nobody really looked at why. And I'm going to give you the main point of this. We'll get through some of the result elements and some of the discussion, but I'll give away the bottom line right here, in that it comes down to inflammation. It's not just that more mitochondrial density or content is a good thing. It is a good thing if you get that increase from exercise, and because you have been, quote, creating the need from a cellular respiration and energy production standpoint. But it can also be just because of inflammation. And so just like we talked about trans fats, how those phospholipid barriers get transposed and that gums up the cell, for lack of a better term here, that's happening here. And so you get, quote, inflammation, you get swelling, you get a maladapted response. So you actually have mitochondrial capacity decreasing while there's actually hypertrophy of those mitochondrial contents. A really good analogy is the heart. Somebody who's a runner, somebody who's well conditioned, they will have a bigger, stronger heart because that left ventricle has strengthened and it's hypertrophied a little bit. Well, somebody who has some kind of cardiac insufficiency, the heart actually also enlarges because now the heart is beating too hard too often to try to make up for that insufficiency. So again, you can have an enlarged heart for a very good reason and a very bad reason. So that's what they found here. And this is the first time they really equated those two things and looked at it from a mechanistic study. So right in the beginning here, we hypothesized that mitochondrial adenosine diphosphate sensitivity would be impaired after a high-fat diet, independent of reductions in mitochondrial content. If accurate, the hypothesis would rectify a prominent discrepancy in the literature regarding the notion that mitochondrial dysfunction occurs in parallel with the development of insulin resistance. So this was all kind of looking at down to this organelle level in a cell. Does a high fat diet create insulin resistance, meaning it's bad for glucose tolerance, diabetes, creating metabolic syndrome responses, etc.? And again, there's no surprise. Yes, it does. You know, a high fat diet is worse than a high carb diet for all those things. So, as I mentioned, this was done with mice. They're very little. I'm maybe in some other reports of this study, they could have given far more detail in the methodology. It was very scant in the Journal of Diabetes where I got the information. So they didn't even say how many mice they used, but 10. It was a 4-week study. The mice ate as much as they wanted ad libitum, broken up into two groups: 10% fat intake group, 60% fat intake group. So a high fat versus low fat group. Intraperitoneal glucose and insulin tolerance tests, so a lot of blood draws, resting VO2 and CO2 rates, respiration taken at all times in metabolic cages. And then they would check the cellular respiratory, mitochondria changes in the gastroc upon termination of the mice. So here's what I'm going to show you 4 slides, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these because this gets into that heavy biochemistry that I said I think would really stop us from getting to the bottom line that we want. But I'll show you a couple things here. The normal diets here in white versus the high fat diet, things like carbohydrate oxidation. The main thing I want you to see here, so this is the verification that a high-fat diet induced glucose intolerance, or I should say verification that a high-fat diet does create glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, fat oxidation. So, you can go through all these things later if you want. I put the actual study name and link on that first slide, but I want to kind of buzz through these things to show you what I think is a more important application point. Increased markers of mitochondrial content in the absence of altered max respiration capacity, showing again that without the exercise-induced training increase in capacity of the mitochondria, you can also get that increase in mitochondrial content just by a high-fat diet because you're reducing the efficiency of how those cells can create energy. Again, probably because some of that trans fat phospholipid transposition on the membranes. But they, like I said, they got into some really deep chemistry here. They're checking L-carnitine levels intracellularly, things like that. All these other substrates and blood markers, some of them inflammatory markers directly. Impaired submaximal ADP, adenosine diphosphate, stimulated respiration, ADP sensitivity, and suppression of H2O2 emission dependent of substrate transporter protein expression. So you can see why I didn't want to spend a lot of time going through these things. I don't think many of us, including me, want to get this deep into what they were looking at that cellular level. This is one of those places where I think getting into the deepest part of their discussion points is a little bit more important, unless you are a researcher and you really want to go through this stuff. Occasionally, you can find some things that you say, hey, look, wait, what's that? That doesn't make sense. But when you go through the journal metabolism, diabetes, etc., I tend to be a little bit more trusting on the review processes. But let's move on here. One more of these. See if there's anything important here. So just look at mitochondrial sensitivity. Okay, I'm going to get to their discussion points, and then I know Dr. Souders, who we're lucky to have on the call here, really has some great information and interest in the mitochondria role in dysfunction with inflammatory disease induced processes, that sort of thing. Dr. Juergens also mentioned something on our app chat about C-reactive protein, and is there anything directly correlated to that with fat intake? Which the answer I'll show you on the next slide, I think, Don, is resoundingly yes. And those are some things we can talk about as well. But here's one of their final points. We provide compelling evidence that consumption of a high-fat induced mitochondrial dysfunction, high-fat diet induced mitochondrial dysfunction as a result of impaired ADP sensitivity. So this goes back into, again, your mitochondria within the cell's ability to break ATP down to ADP in its usable substrates for energy. So when that is impaired, when the cell's own center for energy production is impaired at creating energy, you're going to have an entire cascade of issues after that. One of them being increases of inflammation because your body's just not keeping up. It's almost like watching aging happen in real time, which I think we all know what that looks like. Plenty of internet memes show a 75-year-old on a walker on a deathbed and another 75-year-old running a marathon. Like we know what an entire life of good or ill health can do. And this gets down to, I think, just about as basic of the root cause as we can, which is the tens of trillions of cells in our body, the actual ability to create cellular respiration, which is the cornerstone of metabolism. Specifically, we show that despite the induction of mitochondrial biogenesis and unaltered maximal ADP stimulated respiration at physiological ADP concentrations were impaired after the high-fat diet. In addition, the ability of ADP to stimulate respiration and attenuate mitochondrial H2O2 emission were decreased after the high-fat diet, whereas modeling reactive lipid levels that occur with high-fat consumption exacerbated the apparent mitochondrial dysfunction. Combined, these data strongly indicate impaired mitochondrial bioenergetics after a high-fat diet due to impaired ADP sensitivity. So again, a lot of this we have typically said, hey, that's carbs. Like carbs are doing that. That's what carbs do. That's why carbs cause diabetes. I just can't emphasize enough how, yes, too much sugar, too much carbohydrate, too much calorie intake, hypercaloric diets also do this, but it's at a much lower level. Fat just does it far, far greater. And once again, this is not so we can choose, oh, I'll have a high sugar diet. That's great. High fat diets are bad. You don't want high sugar. You don't want high fat. You want most of your food to come from healthy, whole food sources, including whole food, low glycemic load carbohydrate. But you can't just say carbs are the enemy, keto's the way to go, or you're going to end up here. So their final point here, whereas genetic models and interventions that increase mitochondrial content typically have improved insulin sensitivity, again, because they're looking at healthy people that have higher mitochondrial content because of exercise and, just activity, consumption of the high-fat diet in the current study and others paradoxically resulted in increased mitochondrial content despite the induction of glucose intolerance and insulin resistance. Therefore, the notion that mitochondrial dysfunction contributes to the development of insulin resistance has waned in recent years. Our data, however, implicate high-fat consumption in impairing respiration and increasing mitochondrial HCO2 emission as a result of impaired ADP sensitivity. So a couple of the things that I thought, and I just went and got a smattering of extra links here, not links, but things that show a little bit more of what's behind this kind of study and why I said it was really important in the current canon of exploring high-fat diets and what they really do at the cellular level. Exercise and mitochondrial health. I created just little snippets here. Since the 1960s, decades worth of research has demonstrated that exercise promotes a robust increase in mitochondrial content. As I said, that's why I always thought just looking at mitochondrial content was always like, oh, that person's healthy or that person's not. And now we know differently. Effects of exercise, mitochondrial content and function, kind of the same thing. A higher mitochondrial content is associated with greater oxidative damage, oxidative defense, protein synthesis, ATP turnover, etc. So again, that can go both ways. I mentioned that this wasn't necessarily the best study to look at just fat, but if we really want to look at inflammation and where it comes from in cellular dysfunction, it kind of might be. So that's why I wanted to lead with that one. And then some more evidence here that we could look at. These are some that I did review that I thought, yeah, I wish I would have saved more time to talk about these as well. Impact of dietary fat on gut microbiota and low-grade systemic inflammation, mechanisms and clinical implications in obesity. High dietary fat induces NADPH oxidase-associated oxidative stress and inflammation in rat cerebral cortex, so even brain inflammation and aging and all that good stuff that can be linked with degeneration and decline. Modulation of obesity-induced inflammation by dietary fats, mechanisms and clinical evidence. So again, just to show you that this is not something fringe or out of the ordinary, this has been known for quite a while. It just hasn't quite made it into our zeitgeist. Like most people still want to blame carbs and sugar for all things bad when it comes to obesity or diabetes or glucose intolerance or metabolic syndrome related dysfunction. So once again, with such a great panel, I know Amy is not here. She's a physician's assistant who is often here with us, but we have Dr. Souders and Dr. Juergens, Dr. Brunacini, so many learned people here. Anybody want to jump in and just throw in any comments in there on that educational side first, and then we'll entertain some questions on a practical side? Who's jumping in first? It's like the Wild West. Everybody's got their hand on the holster. Who's gonna draw? It's a standoff.
Hey, Joe.
Here comes Don. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you? Thank
Great.
you. I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm, so they might hear some rain, and I'm just driving from point A to point B. One of the things that has interested me and something I became aware of, and it's probably one of the primary things that I teach in a general food first approach, is the kind of disastrous implications of polyunsaturated fatty acids in PUFAs, in excess. The research is pretty replete, and getting to the impact is at the mitochondrial level with mitochondrial leakage, the aspect of or atom leakage from the electron leakage from the mitochondria, transmembranous. And not so much the trans fat or implications on the membrane, actually the direct uncoupling that's actually occurring, and this is where we see the depletion aspect of ADP to ATP conversion, because the electrons are leaking, in the cascading event, they're leaking out of the membrane. So one of the things that I'm hearing is, the excess fats, and no question about it. Just wondering about the differentiation of the fats, if any of that was made, within the research. And then what struck me is perhaps not the exact type of research done on rats or what have you, and there where maybe it's not as a direct corollary to human metabolome. It's just something that I was thinking about regarding. It's really important to study the fat here as opposed to just the generalization of fat. So, but one of the things that I wanted to put forward was the excess polyunsaturated fatty acid that we've seen in modern time, especially in the U.S. and any of the industrial countries, where the corollary between excess fats going to vegetable oils and what have you, and the almost direct corollary with increasing disease states. And here we have the reasoning for the mitochondrial component and the what is inflammation, at the molecular level. What exactly is inflammation, and then it goes down to tissue damage. And what you're talking about at the mitochondrial level is if there's not enough ATP. You said it perfectly, in my opinion, and I think it's one of the big takeaways. We're looking at aging in the moment, and that's exactly what inflammation is. It's a repair response, but it becomes chronic, or it's occurring in a way that's not supposed to be. And I think at the mitochondrial level, it's seeing it all the time, and then you have to have the cellular response. Communication that, hey, my membrane isn't where it's supposed to be. The cell state's not where it's supposed to be. Thus, in essence, there's injury. So that's all I wanted to say.
Now, 2 or 3 really good points there, and I'll go in reverse order. What you just said there about aging and what is inflammation, I totally agree. That's why I really wanted to keep redefining that, or at least trying to make it simple in this series. Create some kind of a heuristic for health-minded people to really understand what's happening. And you're exactly right. All the way from reactive oxygen species just running amok to cells not being as efficient, creating that energy. You have that low-grade inflammatory response. So see reactive protein and so forth. Your immune system is constantly being peaked and drained, so to speak. The epigenetics of what that could create in terms of gene expression for different disease processes. You just run into even all the way down to excess histamine reactions. So somebody ends up with just chronic arthritis and joint pain where, they may not have if they had lived a better life. But I want to go back to your first point, because I'm really glad you brought that up. It was a total miss on my part to forget to include the fact that this was mostly a saturated fat compound. When you look at these studies, they typically are using feed from different pharmaceutical companies who are creating these just for research. So they're very standardized, almost like a pet food company. Like you get these from these different research institutes. And this one was a saturated fat compound. So a while back when we were looking at just the science of fats in general, I think we did a multi-series look at that. The polyunsaturated fatty acids that maybe a decade or so ago really got the shaft. I mean, everybody all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh, canola oils and everything, soybean oils and everything, they're killing us, the food industrial complex. And because those are not saturated fats, they do have to be looked at and treated a little bit differently. And you miss an opportunity for good quality fats from omega-3s and so forth. But you can't say that they necessarily have much of a deleterious effect on health. I mean, it's almost a point of neutrality, and maybe that's not sophisticated enough as an answer. But omega-3s, healthy, good. We need more. Trans fats, horrible. Keep them out. And then in the middle, as long as your total fat intake isn't too high, those aren't going to be much of an issue. But I really appreciate your perspective, Don. Always so incredibly thorough.
If I could just jump, and this is if I could just jump in one more time, and this is the distinction problem, in my opinion, regarding saturated fats, polys, and monos, and the distinction goes down to the omega-3, omega-6. So you have polyunsaturated and the omega-3s, which are completely different than the polyunsaturated and omega-6s. What I'm talking about, and what the research is replete about, in my opinion, is that we're talking about the polyunsaturated and the omega-6 category, the vegetable oil polyunsaturated, and it's in excess. And I think one of the things, which I learned from you recently, Joe, is this dynamic balance between carbs and fats, and where the fat component has, and by the way, I was caught up in it a bit as well myself, in that, fats are good. The saturated fats are good, all this, and there's no double bond, there's no single bonds and all the other stuff, double bonds, and that it really comes down to ratio quantities. is if you're eating a lot of fats, it's just not good. I mean, in a generality, and that what I learned from you, and stop me if I'm wrong, is that the lower fat profile, if you're going to have, for whatever reason, prescribe higher fat, like in a ketogenic diet, then you have the low carbohydrate profile. Lots of problems with that in ketosis and ketogenics. But what I see the problem is when both are high, when the carbohydrate intake is high and the fat content high, is that we're seeing this vast disease signaling and vast issues with both those babies being high. And that was a big takeaway I learned from you early on that really got me thinking and about that. So one is excess fats in the generality. Two, in polyunsaturated fatty acids, is looking at the omega-6, not the omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, and that it's the excess quantities that people, like my mom, and when I was younger, they're cooking in vegetable oil, in corn oil, and doing all that, and that was a big change from early America, when they were pretty much just using saturated fats, not to excess, but even in the diet as they went west, their dressings, for a salad, was made from sour cream, and it's really interesting looking at old recipes and how they were constructed, and the almost non-existent coronary disease that was early on. So it's excess fats, and then the distinction to the specific fats, and then the distinction into the omega-3 sixes for me anyway so far.
Yeah, in the difference between the good old days when people did eat much higher fat content diets, we had a 2% rate of obesity, and the movement was much higher, and so you were using so much energy that just didn't matter. And as one of the takeaways, so this is what I hope from these research reviews. When we did that segment on fat, somebody let me know through our chat that as I was talking about how every salad dressing, even an Italian salad dressing oil that you would think, oh, that's clearly going to have olive oil. No, soybean oil. And everything is omega-6 at this point. But there are sources. Like, I now have Italian dressing that's made with flaxseed oil, omega-3s. And you can find those kinds of things if you're willing to do the work. And I think that can be where you're just dotting every I, crossing every T. So yeah, could not agree more. Dr. Sowers, what do you think? I don't know if you jumped in time to hear. I almost wanted to say I chose this one on mitochondria because I know you love looking at that as a source of dysfunction in the body.
Well, I just wanted to actually chime in first, sort of following up with what Don said. I mean, when we start looking at ketogenic high-fat diets, we should at least recall too, like if you're a Maasai warrior or an Alaskan native and you're eating a carnivore diet, many of those people are incredibly metabolically healthy, but you have to look at it's not just simply the fat content of the diet and its saturated nature entirely. So first of all, these are also people who have not the civilization stresses that we do. I mean, I don't think very many Maasai warriors or Alaskan natives, if there are many of them left at all, but if they're living in their traditional culture, they're certainly not getting pinged with 25 notifications every hour on a cell phone. They are not dealing with the kind of ongoing chronic low-level stress that comes with modern society. So first of all, you are not building a background noise level of high inflammatory markers to begin with. So you're not activating that fight or flight system inappropriately. you're activating it appropriately when direct threats come, and then when direct threats are resolved, then it goes back down to a baseline. Whereas one of the problems with modern society is stress is of a different nature, and our old programming still responds the way it did to old threats. It cannot distinguish appropriately being yelled at by your boss as being different than being charged by a rhinoceros, right? So but the rhinoceros episode is few and far between in real life. And so we're bathing our bodies in inflammatory markers because of the sort of chronic elevation of modern stress. So that's one of the first things. Once you have that, almost anything that you do wrong dietarily, and I put wrong in scare quotes, but everything that you do on that background has a larger impact, right? So if a particular dietary intervention is going to have negative effects on mitochondrial energy and mitochondrial health and resilience to disease and progress through the mitochondrial healing cycle, then if we add that insult on to an already activated system, the results are going to be far more dramatically bad. I will read just a little section here. The healing cycle in metabolic terms reframes the pathophysiology of chronic illness as the result of metabolic signaling abnormalities that block healing and cause the normal stages of the cell danger response to persist abnormally. Once an injury occurs, active progress through the stages of healing is driven by sequential changes in cellular bioenergetic, and the disposition of oxygen and carbon skeletons used for fuel, signaling, defense, repair, and recovery. Over 100 chronic illnesses can be organized into 3 persistent stages of the cell danger response. 102 targetable chemosensory G protein coupled and ionotropic receptors are presented that regulate the cell danger response and healing. Metabolochines are signaling molecules derived from metabolism that regulate these receptors, reframing the pathogenesis of chronic illness in this way as a system problem that maintains disease rather than focusing on remote triggers that cause the initial injury, permits new research to focus on noveling signal therapies to unblock the healing cycle. So, basically, what does that mean? We live in a milieu where when we are in a healing cycle from some insult, let's say it's an infection, right? We already have so many aberrations in background signaling in terms of cytokines, metabolochines from chronic stresses that they interfere with the cell danger response resolution and the repair cycle of mitochondria. So in other words, it signals to the mitochondria that the issue hasn't resolved, right? So we can't really focus on healing it. And these chemokines, affect immune cells and immune cell signaling throughout the body. I don't want to get into it too much, but I just want to emphasize that kind of the current dynamic is looking at the fact that we have a lot of background signaling going on in modern society, which is perpetuating chronic disease. And whether it be from diet or whether it be from environment and whether it be from toxins or whether it be from the normal things of, physical and physical injuries and systemic illnesses and things like that, there are negative effects on the cellular healing cycle. So if we have bad energetics from the diet, all that does is show us potentially why atherogenesis, right, a metabolic disease of the cardiovascular system, is so much more prevalent in these high-fat diets, but not if you're a Maasai warrior. Well, I also want to point out, too, that modern keto is horrific because guess what? People don't want to eat like that. Like, I've been put on a medical ketogenic diet. It was an essential thing for me to fight a life-threatening infection. So that meant to me whole meat and vegetables. That is what I ate. But if you go and you go to the grocery store and people say, I'm doing keto, they got keto cupcakes, they got keto peanut butter cups, they got keto potato chips, they got keto. And it's just crap. It's just loads of highly pro-inflammatory chemical frankenfoods. So it's not just simply the fat and the fat contents, but it's everything that goes along with it. And we have to think that as humans, why do we want this? Because we hate eating keto.
So a couple things, Jen. I love, of course, the differentiation as Don started off between, hey, let's make sure we're talking about saturated fat and not all fat. I think it's also important, as you noted, can we transfer this information from a rat study, because we have all of these other stressors? You were looking at rats compared to rats, mice compared to mice. And so we don't know, like maybe they have these little paradise incubators and they were all stress-free, happy mice. Or maybe they were all super, super stressed. But anyway, group A and group B, experimental group and control group, they were the same. And I would say, like, even when you get down to people who have had to eat keto because that's all they had available, salmon and that sort of thing, because there's nothing but snow on the ground, we don't know anthropologically if they were as healthy as they could be. The human body is resilient enough in mammalian genetics to adapt, but I mean, were they dying in heart disease in their 50s? I mean, maybe not, but it just depends on body composition and being overfed.
Yeah, there are some studies that indicate no, that there were some studies that examined them and they were actually metabolically fairly healthy. But they're very few and far between, because the opportunities to study these people and the opportunity to study them where modern diet hasn't invaded their lives and modern civilization, it was vanishingly small 2 centuries ago and shrinking dramatically since. So what little we do know is enough to raise questions that it's not simply the dietary composition in and of itself, so much as that we also need to consider it's the whole foods aspect of the diet, and then also a more vigorous lifestyle potentially, and certainly a different kind of type of stress exposure for those people.
And one more thing I would say, piggybacking on your phrase there, because we just don't know, we couldn't study it as we might today. I don't even know if whatever condition you were facing and you were given the advice, and I'm not trying to pick a fight, but for them to say you must, for this inflammatory condition, this pro-healing environment we want to create, you must eat a healthy carnivore diet. With this kind of research, maybe people giving that advice today would say, wait a second, there's a better way to handle that. Like, maybe, Dr. Souders, we should have put you on this kind of diet with some whole grains and this kind of thing. And instead of animal meat, maybe make sure it was mostly salmon and these, protein supplements that would have been cleaner, healthier. But to your point, if you're going higher fat or higher carbs, lower carbs or lower fat juxtaposed, you're probably going to be in an energy deficit, or at least calorie maintenance that matches your needs. And so that's where you can get into, one is not the best diet on the planet and one is not the worst. They literally are number one and number two in most ways you measure them, because both of them assume a hypercaloric appropriate calorie deficit. So you're going to see some decrease in inflammatory reaction from both.
Right. And that's an awesome point. And again, that's why, even if you do choose those diets to make an initial step change in weight loss and make, accomplish a goal, get closer to goal weight. I mean, it really is a necessary and appropriate thing to then be moving on to what would be a balanced diet. And you really need the education about what does that balanced diet look like. It can contain the occasional Pop-Tart, but it's not going to be Pop-Tart based. and that you need to maintain as much as possible, a high quality diet, whether it's mixed or not.
See, Tyler. Well, and one of the things that I like to do with these research reviews, as I mentioned, I got way better salad dressing that's healthier for me now, just because we tackled a certain topic here, is I think it's important for us to take some heuristics away from this to make it easier for ourselves. And so with a study like this, it makes me want to redouble my efforts and say, man, I just need to make sure I'm avoiding saturated fat as much as I can. So do I really need that Pop-Tart if I can have a little handful of granola and dried fruit? Do I really need, those tortilla chips when I could get some baked tortilla chips? Like where can I make some better decisions? Because over the course of a life, as Don and I discussed, you're watching aging in real time. When you get to be 60, 70, 80 years old, you can't make the changes. Like you've got decades worth of health, at that cellular level that has already been adapted for. And so these I really, really hope help people make decisions like that.
Right. And it's again, it comes down to also, I love reemphasizing the whole foods. For instance, if you are going to consume a saturated fat, here's a off the cuff example. So if you want to consume saturated fat, is it not better, for instance, to eat raw coconut, where you're eating it in its natural state with whatever phytochemicals, fiber, and other things that come from the whole substance itself, I guess it's a fruit, itself, and if you're going to consume it like that, as opposed to spreading it on your bread, and using it in your baked goods and things like that. So in the case of eating saturated fat as a piece of raw coconut, is definitely not the same as the saturated fat in a Pop-Tart, because of all the other stuff that tails along. So when you do consume your saturated fats, if you want to have whole steak or things like that, you choose your fats in the most natural state that you can. Enjoy them. They, like anything, they're part of a reasonable diet, but don't put don't waste your saturated fats on the junk, right?
In a bioenergetics way, coming back to that was going to be my point, is you were talking about eating whole coconut. Like if I want saturated fat, I'm probably not going to grab a coconut. I would want a steak.
Right.
And so from an energetic standpoint, I could take the better, more responsible route and say, okay, if I really, really want that steak, maybe that is a meal where I am going to forego some starchy carbs, because I'm going to get a lot of excess calories from this fat. To Don's point, where he was quoting me, I don't want my body so busy assimilating all this glucose and glycogen from the carbohydrate source, and then the fat source is just immediately getting stored as fat. I'm going to just forego all of that starch so I can enjoy the steak. Or another couple steps is make sure I've constructed my whole day where calorically that fits. That's not going to be a hypercaloric day where I'm throwing saturated fat on top of an already normal full day. There are so many ways that you can still enjoy some occasional saturated fats and so forth, and still not have it impact your health nearly, with any negativity.
Right. It really just has to depend on the background, and again, I'll even make considerations like if I am super stressed out and I feel like, and so I want to take a break and go out to eat. That's probably the day I'm better off getting the large salad with either the salmon and the chicken breast on it, not the steak, because again, I've already got a chemical milieu in the body where I'm not going to be able to dispose of those nutrients in that state as well, or as appropriately, or as healthily as I could, if I went there on a very calm and celebratory state, like your birthday or something like that.
Well, we are going to, like I said, next week, going to try and dive into what's really happening with the high sugar and higher carbohydrate based diets with inflammation. So today we were kind of picking on fat. Certainly carbs have their place and they have their issues, but again, more in a just hypercaloric diet. I do want to mention one thing before we wrap up, because Jen, you really mentioned this well, that there's a lot more to inflammation than just diet. And I asked this instructor if she wants more clients, because I'm gonna post this. I took a couple of my local clients last night. This was our first session, to a somatic healing yoga instructor.
Nice.
And it was unbelievable from
Yeah.
just a stress reduction perspective. So there are many types of yoga, and
Right.
a lot of them are very physical based, like stretch, 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 get in this position and stretch, stretch, stretch. Some of them are exercise yoga, some of them are hot yoga. This is positional release yoga, where if you feel
Yes.
a stretch, you're going too far. When you get into the dynamics of the Golgi tendon organs and the muscle spindles, the connections between the brain, central nervous system, and the muscle tissue, and you're using breath work to gradually let the muscle tissue relax. We got into these positions where you could literally feel with every breath, like, okay, here's my hip external rotation. This is as far as I can go. And then with your leg here, your psoas is relaxed. With every single breath, you could feel your leg just go down about an inch at a time. And pretty soon it's like you just increase your hip external rotation double, and you didn't force any kind of mechanical stress. It's just the complete relaxation of your sympathetic nervous system.
Right.
And so, wow, what a thing. And you can do this kind of like meditation. There's all kinds of modalities to reduce stress, which reduces inflammation, which reduces. But when you see how tight your body was when you walk into this room, and then you come into that perspective where I can walk away and feel like this, you can just imagine the cascade of anti-inflammatory responses and the autoimmune things changing because of that.
Yeah.
So, we're going to continue tackling this from a dietary perspective, but there is a lot more to systemic inflammation, and that being a root cause or aid for health.
And
So
I just want to say too how much I love Don's commentary, because I just find it so based in a lot of experience and so well founded. And thank you. I love hearing your comments. You are super.
I agree. Stick around, Don. We like you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for the article, which I'd like to at some point talk to you about, that you recommended
Oh
last
yeah.
week. Yeah, really, really,
Yeah,
really, really.
these things are deep topics, and I may not be capable of discussing them at a high level either. It's really dense. Yeah, but
Oh, no, there's lots of implications and things to speak into. If I could just, before we wrap up, something occurred to me while this was going on, and I don't know, maybe everyone's already thinking about this, but I love the conversation as to inflammation. Love the way you put this forward, Joe. But this is what's occurred to me. Listen, I love evolutionary medicine. I love thinking about where we've come from and how we ate, and all of that, and of course epigenetic expression and what have you. And so everything, everything by season, but everything is ratio: omega-3, omega-6, omega-9, and how we would eat within nature. All of that excesses, it's gonna be screwed up. But this is what occurred to me regarding carbs and fats, and it was your comment, Joe, about the aging in the moment on a membrane level. And one thing I learned a while back regarding the DNA is kind of the gonads of the cell. Everyone thinks that DNA is this thing that's just kicking off, and it's not. It's actually, it needs signaling, right? And the signaling comes from cell membranes, from either an organelle membrane, a cell membrane, and usually organelle membranes, but of course the cell membrane is interacting with environment, right? And the organelle membranes are intracellular interactions from that. And then we're getting the signaling into the DNA, which is what exposes epigenetic expression for a given allele set, right? So basically, it seems the fats are affecting or getting inflammatory response because of
cell membrane damage in however we want to look at it, and often mitochondrial electron leakage or what have you, but in some way, the membrane is being affected and recognized as damage, and that sets up the inflammatory cascading to heal, and that's continuous, it's chronic. And we see that in neuroplasticity, right? We see that in transmembranous degeneration in the neuron, right, in the brain cell. The carb component is not the membrane aspect of inflammation genesis. The carb is, to Jen's point, is related to metabolic axis stimulation, where we're looking at insulin as a highly inflammatory molecule, cortisol implications. And what I had said last time, something that had occurred to me a long time ago, was this reactive response from an aberrant stress axis, so the top of the metabolic axis, right? So the HPA axis, where if you have a regular stress response, you're going to get adrenaline, norepinephrine production. You're going to get your insulin spiking. You're going to get glucagon. You're going to get your glucose release from the liver, and in preparation for fight or flight. In these sensitized systems, in these aberrant dysfunctional autonomic states, which are in epidemic proportions, what I put forward a while ago was that if someone takes in, and of course we already have insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance, if someone takes in excess or high glycemic aspect of a carbohydrate, how the system recognizes it as a fight or flight response. That all of this glucose is now in the system. We must be in fight or flight. It's already in fight or flight response, and it perseverates in the continued inflammatory response. So, in essence, eating inappropriate carbohydrate amounts with a fast uptake is in essence creating a stress response on a molecular level to an already aberrant autonomic nervous system, which starts the pro-inflammatory molecular cascading, which sets up all the problems. So I see two things. I see the membrane component of inflammation from fats, and I see this other inflammatory molecular cascading from cortisol, insulin, what have you, responsiveness. So that's what occurred to me, just now. I don't know. Maybe everyone thinks that way already, and I missed the boat after 30 years. But I'm just putting that forward.
No, I think you're exactly right, and that's what next week when we look at carbs versus fat in this, and there could be even three mechanisms. You kind of lumped in carbohydrate and insulin with cortisol. I think to Jen's point about just the hyper threat response environmentally around us, that's a third layer of that.
Yes.
But and I think there are so many split pros and cons with carbs. For example, the great hunger cueing things that we get resolution from the hypothalamus, like fat, just molecularly just bad. Like there's nothing you can say pro about trans fats, saturated fats. Carbs, we need a certain amount of that energy. It's more bioavailable. There's all kinds of things that split it to be not quite as harmful, but in excess it still is. And then you start smashing these things together and you got that perfect storm. But I appreciate that, Don. That really gives me some clarity on what to even look for next week to as a contrast to fats. So it's really, really good. But I do have to wrap it up for now. You guys, this is awesome. I think this is going to go down as one of our best series ever. So I really appreciate that. And we'll continue on next week if we can. You guys have an awesome rest of your weekend. Appreciate you being here.
You too, Joe. Enjoy. Thank you so much for it. Thank you.
Okay. See you guys.